All right, welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Stephanie Ross. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So I think it was your cousin that reached out to me.
Right.
Said, Stephanie's got an amazing story. I really love your podcast. Can you try to get her on? I shot you a text. You were more than willing to come in. So how does the story of Stephanie begin?
Okay, so I'm from Ogden. I was born and raised in the area of Ogden. When I was 3, my parents had gotten divorced, and my mom had married my stepdad. And my earliest memories are in a bar. My mom and my dad owned a bar, or my stepdad, and it was called The Frog. And so we got to spend our weekends at the bar, and I just remember, playing on the stage, sleeping in the back room when the nights were open, jump in the booths. And so that kind of scene was what I've grown up with from such a really young age.
So were the characters, the patrons of the bar, did they treat you like family? Did they know you were the owner's kids? And I mean, in my head, I'm envisioning a kind of a Cheers scenario, because you go back and watch the old sitcom Cheers, and it was a family. Everybody knew what was going on, and everybody was involved in everybody's life. And some bars are like that, most aren't. But was it kind of like that for you?
So not so much like with the visitors, but the bar staff. Yeah. They're still, I still have Facebook friends. Like they were really close. And my stepdad and my mom, they were partiers. Like they had, she put on a good time. And so, it was a family deal. And so we got really close with all of them for quite some time. But that was what that was what I knew.
And, that's interesting, because the bar then for you kind of felt like home. Right? Mm-hmm. And so, if you think about behavioral associations, emotional associations, things start to take on certain feelings if we associate them together. So the whole Pavlov's dog kind of idea. And so for most people, a bar wouldn't feel like home. But if you grew up there, then it would feel like a very comfortable place, maybe even a place you wanted to be, because it sounds like you had a lot of fun there as a kid.
When you think about it, as a young teenager, it's like forbidden fruit. I mean, you
can't go into the bar.
Yeah,
when you're a teenager.
What happens there? It sounds amazing.
I remember walking down the street, 25th Street in Ogden, when I was a teenager. First of all, that was a scary place to be back in the 80s. And I remember peeking in the bars, like, oh, what's going on in there?
What kind of fun is happening behind those doors? Why do you have to be a certain age to get in there? But it's something that it's mysterious. For some, it's scary. But for you, it was home.
It was. And, and I don't remember what year they sold that. I think by the time I was 10, but those are my earliest memories. Like that was, my mom, she was a party thrower. And so.
At any point during those adolescent years, did you imbibe? Did you taste any alcohol? Did you try it?
At that time, no. We thought it was fun to get the glasses and fill it up with Coke and Pepsi and, act like we were doing it.
So you got a playing house, playing bar,
right? Because, the little handles with all the 10 different,
Oh, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, back behind the bar and drinking Snapple bottles,
Yeah, we did that growing up because my parents drank, and we'd go to, restaurants, and they'd order drinks, and me and my brothers, we'd get Roy Rogers, which is the same thing as the Shirley Temple, but it's just for boys.
Oh.
This is just Sprite and grenadine.
Makes you feel a little better.
But it was one of those things. It's like, well, these guys are getting a special drink. Why don't we get a special drink? And so we'd get a Roy Rogers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, we did that at that time throughout the bar stages. No, I didn't try anything.
And then they sold it when you were 10.
I think it was right around I was 10. Mm-hmm. I can't remember for sure. But
that's most of your early life, most of elementary school growing up at the bar.
Yeah, so my dad had custody of us when they split. And so, but then throughout my whole life, it was jumping back and forth between the two houses. Mm-hmm. And so I never had a place where I really fit in, and then switching schools. And then my mom liked to move. So it wasn't every other year at the same school. It was like in Ogden or out in West Haven. So we moved a lot. And I would I'm very social, very friendly. And I just find someone to fit in with.
But so you really never had a place to plant your roots?
Not like...
in a friend circle.
No, No, not in like the younger years. I mean, I still am connected with some people from elementary, but like as I went from elementary, then I'd go to a different junior high, and then I'd switch to junior high and go back to the other one. So by the end of my junior high years is when I started using, like eighth to ninth grade, drinking and smoking pot. And I just found that, I was fun.
And so would it be unfair to say that the bar years were some of the more stable, consistent years because that was a place you went? No, you were moving around a lot.
Yeah.
But the bar itself was consistent until they sold it.
Yeah.
And so that might even make the bar feel a little more like home, because with all this moving around until you were 10 or so, you had the bar to go back to and the family of the staff and everybody. It's interesting.
Yeah, and my dad had gotten married to my stepmom, and we didn't have me and her weren't a good time.
You didn't vibe.
Yeah, no, and he worked nights, and I wasn't allowed to call my mom, because me and my mom's relationship was toxic, but like she was my person, and
So your stepmother wouldn't let you call your mom if you were upset or
No.
wanted to. And
Nope.
for the young kids listening, back in the old days, you didn't have a phone in your pocket that you could go in another room.
No,
and
you
call.
had a
Yeah,
phone
no.
with a large cord
And
that
it
draped around the whole house.
Right.
And
yeah.
it was in the
Cordless if you were
kitchen.
lucky.
Yeah.
It was in the kitchen where
Everyone
part.
could listen to your call.
Yeah, and so, at those times, like, that's when I started, my loneliness or, feelings of abandonment a little bit. Like, I was just alone in this little
Did you have
world.
siblings?
I did. I have a little sister, and then she had 3 kids also.
Oh.
We were treated differently, though.
So you had a sister, a full biological sister. How much younger than you?
She's 3 years younger.
3 years. Were you close, or sometimes 3 years is a little too much space?
Yeah, we've been pretty close.
Okay.
When the whole house jumping, we didn't always go together. Maybe first through 4th grade, me and her were together, and then like in 6th grade she stayed with mom, and third, and then I went to my dad's. So at that time is when we started separating it.
So you use the word abandonment issues, and I can see that.
But she downplayed it. She said a little abandonment.
Yeah.
And that kind of struck me because you're downplaying what it is, and it was a real emotion. And if you felt abandoned, that's okay. It's okay to own that, I think, but I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can downplay it a little, but I felt that way, but I don't like to think of it as that. Like now, like how far I am in my recovery, like, and seeing, like, knowing what my mother and stuff went through, like I understand her struggles a little more,
You got a little more insight.
Yeah. And so I'm a little bit more understanding on, where I was and why I was feeling these ways. And, my insecurities played into that. My insecurities ultimately ended up being a big part of my addiction.
And, you're bringing up sort of a good meta topic for the listeners to know, and that is sometimes people avoid therapy, whether it's addiction recovery therapy or otherwise, because they avoid aspects of therapy because they don't want to sound like, oh, I'm criticizing or I'm being overly critical of people in my life. The way I would look at it is we're not judging that. We're just trying to understand the influences that might have created insecurities, right? So not having a real solid, grounded home base and solid, grounded relationships do create insecurities in those early years. Now, we can look back on it and realize, well, your parents were the architects of that instability because they were moving you around as much, but we can also understand that they were probably dealing with their own difficult issues in their lives and maybe doing the very best they can. So it's not a criticism per se, right. Of your mother or your father or people like that. They're your parents, you criticize them if you want, but I'm just saying sometimes people stop their in-depth analysis because they don't want to feel like they're criticizing those important people in their life. And I would say let's reframe that to, we're not criticizing them. We're just trying to understand the dynamics of everything that happens so that you can have personal insight and say, well, why was I an insecure kid? Well, it kind of makes sense. Sometimes my sister was there. Sometimes she wasn't. Sometimes I was moving around to these different houses and there was a lot of bouncing back and forth. And, there's a lot of security that comes from a kid who says, this is my house and this is my neighborhood and this is my school. And it doesn't sound like you really had that on a consistent basis?
Well, like, and my dad, my dad's always been stable, consistent. He's been a solid core. So me moving back and forth was ultimately like my choices and really what I wanted to do, but also like to be with my mom. You know, I longed for that, that love for my mother.
You said it was toxic?
My mom?
Your relationship with your mom?
Yes. So
can you explain that a little
yes. My mom was an alcoholic. And a very, very bad alcoholic. And so for my younger year, you know, really young, like that was the household I grew up in. Very toxic, it was abusive. But on the outside looking in, we were a great, perfect family. Picture perfect, you know, like what happened behind closed doors was not allowed to be talked about. From an early age, gifts became a big thing. When something bad behind the scenes happened, we would get gifted things for our silence.
So they were bribes, really?
Yeah. Like, you be quiet. Now, I bought you a Barbie. That didn't happen last night.
Wow.
Type of stuff. Yeah. So that's, you know, that's kind of how it was with her. I had this attraction for her. And, like, I needed my mom, you know. My dad and my sister have a really close relationship, and then it was me and my mom. I'm her.
Why do you think that was so important to you? I mean, it sort of seems obvious a little girl would want to have a relationship, but why do you think it sounds like it was really important to you to have that close relationship with your mom?
I don't know at that time, that being that young, why. I know as I got into, 7th and 8th, and stuff, it's because I could just manipulate her. And I could do whatever I wanted at that point, you know. By the time 7th grade, her alcoholism, she was a repetitive drunk. So it's like you would have to sit and listen to her. But she drank and the devil came through. It was like she was almost possessed. It was pretty terrifying. And she would drive us around, you know, and take me to the skating rink 3 times a week, Mom, because that's what I want to do, you know, and if I didn't want to go to school, I didn't have to. And she would just do whatever I wanted. And so 7th grade, we were at my dad's for the weekend, and come to find out we come home and she's in treatment. She got herself into the ACT in Ogden for the first time. So at that time is when we were first introduced to AA. And, you know, at that time I'm like, wow, you know, you could see a whole different person of my mother. She was great. If you knew her, you loved her. Like at her funeral, there was 500 to 800 people. There were people that just kept coming and coming and coming. You know, she was a good person. And so that was our first introduction to recovery. And it was like, wow, this is pretty neat, you know, and we would go to all the events, and she would help, you know, she's a party planner. So she would help set up the parties or fundraisers and things like that. And so we got introduced to that, and then we moved back out to our other house, and that's when I was drinking and smoking. And about 9th-ish grade, she would come to Salt Lake and work when she worked at Wells Fargo, and she wouldn't come home for a few days. Well, the boys renting the basement had just graduated high school, and she would leave us in charge of, you know, them in charge of us. And that's when the big parties started. And, you know, my little sister was there, and I don't even know why this was okay. You know, I couldn't imagine.
I think technically it wasn't okay.
Yeah, it wasn't. Like, but at that time, you know, it was.
What was that like?
Our life.
What happened when she was out of town?
Oh, we'd just party. We'd have big parties. We'd drink. We had a swimming pool out back, and kick my sister out of her room, go sleep in Mom's so we could turn her light on. And, you know, just the boys downstairs would get, you know, and then all of my high school, you know, and we'd all get together and just.
And these were just boys renting the basement? They weren't family?
It was a family friend. So it was a family that we had grown up with, and my mom was really close with, and it was their son.
And his friends.
Yeah. So, you know, at a young age.
That's a big temptation for high school girls to have the older college boys living in the basement, I bet.
Well, it was a good time. Like, we just, you know, and I just like having a good time. When I started drinking and smoking, that was it for me. That was my,
So-
and I was 13, 14 years old. And
Wow.
then the drinking really picked up when I was 15. It was an every night thing. And then I stopped going to school. And I went to the uni, and I did my first 30 days there.
And that was when you were 15.
Yeah.
Why did they have you go to uni? Because
I quit going to school and my drug addiction.
they were there trying to get you sober? Oh.
And through some schooling. And
So I'm going to stop you right there. We're going to come back because I want to figure out, you said your drug addiction, but up to this point, we've only known about alcohol and marijuana. So we're going to find out more about that. You're listening to Project Recovery. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I'm Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. Our guest today is Stephanie Ross. And you were just talking about that was when you first got your stint in uni, which is a university hospital for detox drugs. And
Currently the name's changed.
Yeah.
So it was University Neuropsychiatric Institute. And I like saying uni because it's a lot easier than HMHI, but now it's Huntsman Mental Health Institute. But it's a freestanding psychiatric hospital with kind of a full range of services here in Salt Lake City. And it's kind of a unique place in the Western United States. There aren't too many places like that aren't associated, run by the state. They're an independent, but associated with the University of Utah. So,
But Dr. Matt asked why you went there, and you said it's because of your drinking and drugs. But up to this point in the story,
it's marijuana.
Okay. And so they send you there to get some schooling and kind of just check you out, see how everything's going?
Because I quit going to school. Like, she started drinking again and had relapsed, And so what I got to do was anything I wanted. And so I'd take off in a car and I quit going to school. And, it all stemmed from the drinking and getting high. And then, the little red devils at that point and a little bit of mushrooms. The red devils were terrifying.
If I remember, red devils were a form of kind of speed, over-the-counter speed.
Amphetamine.
It's Sudafed. Cold and cough, yeah. And you take like all of them and get really sick. So
I don't think they even have those on the shelf anymore, right?
No.
Because it was such a huge. But I do remember kids talking about that back when I was a kid, right?
Yeah, so a little bit of that. But then I ended up there for the outpatient, and I did that for the 30 days.
Oh, that makes sense. You mentioned you were doing some schooling up there, and they have an IOP, an intensive outpatient program called Teen Scope.
Yes.
And that's where you'd go up there Monday through Friday probably, and you do half a day of school and a half a day of different types of therapy.
And so I completed that, and then they took me home, and I was supposed to go to Clearfield High at that point. And I wasn't comfortable with myself. I knew nothing about me. I didn't know any Stephanie. I didn't know which way to walk. I knew nothing, And so I'd go in the school and I'd walk out the back, because my grandma worked in the cafeteria. So she would give me a ride, and I'd walk out the back down to my cousins. And I'm like, I'm
so
not
grandma
doing this.
facilitated that? Grandma took you?
Grandma took her to school.
Oh, took you to school,
took me
and
to
then you
school,
ran.
and then
I see.
she worked in the cafeteria, so
Right,
she'd
right,
go to
right.
work and I'd leave.
Gotcha.
And it was at first it was a confusion of my schedule. I didn't know, what to do, and so I never figured it out, so I left.
Well, let me ask you this. I'm kind of curious at this age. So you're 15 still in the story. So, and you started drinking at 13, you said. So that's an interesting time because that early to mid adolescence is the time where kids are usually the most rebellious and, pain in the neck kind of, kind of kids fighting against the man and family and all that. Did you think you needed to be at uni? Did you think you needed help? Did you feel like you should have been in school, or were you like, I don't need any of this? Were you in denial, or were you feeling like, yeah, things aren't going my way?
I did it because they made me at that point. I didn't really have another choice. I did a lot of therapy growing up because she thought she was doing the best to get me help and fix me. And so that's, I never wanted it. And so I learned at that time how to manipulate all of this because exactly, and to get out of there. Well, I ended up not going to school again, for 2 weeks, and they get me back up in uni. But let me back up a little bit. I'd been drinking every night for months and months and months, for probably 6 or 7 months. Now, the first time I was in uni, I didn't tell anyone about that. I'd leave and I'd drink all night, and then I'd go up there. Now, this time I finally, because I started getting sick and withdrawing from alcohol at 15 years old, and I finally came clean to them and was like, okay, listen, I do have a problem. Like, I do need help. So at that time is when they started giving me UAs. And this is so funny. So I thought on the weekends, because, Monday through Friday, that I could smoke weed on Friday. And for some reason, drink cranberry juice, a gallon of it, and I'd come up clean on Monday. And I didn't come up clean. I got caught.
Yeah,
I got caught.
Kids believe a lot of stories about that kind of
freaking
stuff.
crazy,
Yeah.
Cranberry juice.
Frozen spoon will take a hickey off too.
Yeah, and that's when they closed all the doors, shut down all the unit, and told me I was going to Provo Canyon School.
For those who don't know, Provo Canyon School
It was a lockdown school. You couldn't leave, and it had psychiatric treatment, but you stayed there. It was 24 hours a day.
Yes, you did not leave.
Yeah,
you did not go outside.
It's considered a residential treatment school.
Currently, I don't think it's in existence, or maybe it is, but there's some backlash going on.
Yeah.
Paris Hilton attended that school, and she's been up on the Capitol talking about some of the stuff, and I don't know enough to say either way.
I'm not aware of the details of that case either, but, it's tough. It's tough. Do we not provide that kind of treatment for kids? I don't think that's the answer.
But we could ask her, what is your experience? What was your experience with
It was
Provo?
awful. It was humiliating. You had the staff there that was just degrading. I left there a worse person than I had ever went in. And fortunately for me, I only had to be there for 4 months. And some of those girls had been there for years. They were from out of state, and they had different insurance. My insurance had dropped, and so I got to go home. Thank goodness. But I didn't leave there better. I didn't leave there changed. I left there worse. And the self-confidence, the insecurities. It was a place of treatment, but you couldn't see your family. They could visit maybe, and then you did phone treatment with them, and you were coached into your conversations with your parents.
Yeah.
And so they didn't really know what was really happening,
And that's horrible. I have a lot of empathy for you. That's an awful experience. And that's why there needs to be good oversight. Mm-hmm. And I support people like Paris Hilton making awareness because treatment facilities are necessary for a lot of adolescents.
Yes.
But they should be safe, healthy, well-run, and they can be, and many of them are. But that's awful that was your experience. You said it kind of affected your self-esteem. Was there anything that comes to mind? Like, I think the listeners might be curious, like what happened in there that made you feel like a worse person?
Yeah, you just had adult women that were supposed to be like that at that point was your parental supervision or the humans that you only had to look up to because you couldn't even leave to the outside world. You couldn't walk outside. So you were stuck in there and there was no examples of grace or no examples of kindness. And you were just stuck with these other sick girls too. Feeling this and feeling, degraded. There was no good example in that building.
And it doesn't sound like good treatment. I mean,
no.
Your attitudes, your health, your mental health wasn't improving.
So much in fact that you said you left worse than you got there.
Yeah. So I have ADHD. And from when I was younger too, I was on meds. So when I took my meds, they were really great, and through the treatment centers and stuff, like I had to take them right and consistently, and they did a really great job. When I left that place that night, I went over to the park and I smoked weed immediately. Like that was the very first thing. I got home and put my bags in my room and went over to the park. And that, I was back at it. And that's when I started abusing my Adderall. And I found out what else it did. And I could break them apart and snort them. And that took me.
So now
whole
you've
nother
gone
place.
from like alcohol and marijuana, which are kind of mellowing and they're can be depressants, and now you're into stimulants with the
Snorting Adderall.
Up for days, just like, wow, this is the greatest thing. Look at everything I can do. I lost weight really, really quickly, although I'd been on it and then, that was, part of my confidence. I lost the weight and my confidence boosted. I was the queen of Stephanie, and and then within a few weeks coming down off of that was it was painful. It was so sickening.
When you ran out of Adderall, is that what you're saying?
No, just like when I was at the, when I got real tired and needed to go to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, you're not supposed to be up for 4 days at a time.
Yeah,
No, that's true. I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so eventually your body goes, hey, look, we need some rest. And you're saying when your body said, hey, it's time to sleep.
It did not feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I knew what I have, older cousin, I knew what he was doing, and I quickly switched over to meth. And so my meth addiction started at 15, 16 years old. I got my first DUI at 16 for being high on meth. And they took me up to a behavioral center and wouldn't keep me in Ogden. Like, they arrested me in Davis County, took me to Ogden, and those people are like, come get your kid. It's like, we're not keeping her. You need to come get her. And so my dad came and got me, and, of course, I was just mean and evil, and this was a few months before my dad moved to Okinawa, and they had talked about me going. No way was I leaving my new lifestyle to go there. How am I going to take my drugs with me? I couldn't.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the first time someone on the show has said my dad moved to Okinawa.
It is.
So just out of curiosity, why did your dad move to Okinawa, Japan?
He worked on the base. And so him and my sister moved over there as civilians.
And so your sister went?
Yes.
You stayed home with your mom. Now, is your mom currently using alcohol at this time?
Yes. Yeah. So she's drinking, and what happened was I had been coming down, and I was at her house, and she was really drunk. And again, she was terrifying, but I grew up through this my whole life. But now into my addiction, my emotions are a different kind of, I can't walk away from her, and really heightened, and I'm really mean. And so we get into a big fight this night, and I'm like, leave me alone, let me sleep. And that's not what happened. And so it was really, really physical with her and my aunt. And my dad ended up picking me up and moving me down with a family in Salt Lake that I'd become friends with, and thought that was, the safest place for me. I really didn't have another option. I mean, I have a lot of family, but nobody wanted me. I'm out of control. Just doing everything I want, because at that point, anything that Stephanie wanted, Stephanie got, and I was destructive. Nobody wanted anything to do with me. So I moved down with this family, and that's the first time I got clean off meth. Probably 17 at that time. But I never stopped using. I started drinking down there and doing lots of pills. And so, and I thought, being off meth, that I was doing the right thing, but no.
You're just substituting.
I was continuing my addiction in a whole other sense. And I lived down there for about 4 or 5 months. Now, as I mentioned earlier with my mom, her sorries were things. So she got me an apartment. So I would move back down here. And that was my hush.
So she bought you an apartment. That was her present. That was her,
You don't talk about it. You just live here. But you got to get a job, Stephanie, and you have to stay clean. And by this time, I had relapsed down there once or twice and come home. And I'm like, well, you're paying for this. It's paid for. I'm here. I'm not doing that.
What did you like about meth? Why was that a drug of choice for you?
I just, it gave me confidence. I lost the weight. I just loved the way I felt. Like, I just love going, you know. I never had any direction. You know, I never really had any consequences. I just got to do what I wanted to do, and that's what I wanted to do. And for the DUI that I had gotten a few years prior at the apartment, I ended up having to do 30 days in jail. Was my first time. My uncle, like, I hadn't paid about 100 of my fine, and my uncle called them and was like, she's messing up. He's such a hypocrite because they used with him. But I wouldn't give him anything anymore, so he called my PO on me, so I went to jail for 30 days for my first time. And then I ended up...
You're actually using with your uncle, but then because you wouldn't give him any more, he turned you in.
Yeah.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're going to find out how Stephanie's rock bottom came about and what she's doing now. You're listening to Project Recovery right here on KSL. All right, so you're talking about your first 30 days in jail. Mm-hmm. Where does your life go from here?
So I get pregnant after that with my son, and I got clean, quit smoking, everything. Had that baby boy, and he was going to change my world. No. I gained a lot of weight. Again, I'm right back to the meth. And so, you know, I use that as my staple, like to...
Because you know it works.
Yeah. And then, you know, the spiral. Then I got pregnant again. And... God, I hope she doesn't see this, but I need people to know the truth. Like, I didn't stop with her. I didn't get clean with her. Her dad started leaving me for days, and I didn't know how to cope with any of that. And, like, so I used with her, like, the whole time. I had her, and she was perfectly fine. She's been perfectly fine since. You know, God was watching over her. And then I got in trouble again right after she was born, and I did drug diversion in Weber County. Mm-hmm. And I got clean off meth for a year. I didn't do anything. I didn't go get a job. I didn't do anything. I was just like, I'll get through the program like they want me to, but I drank every weekend. So I manipulated my way through that program too. And then as soon as I was off, back out. And that's when I started shooting up.
So you went for shooting meth or shooting heroin?
Meth. So I was back out, and that's when I started shooting meth. It was 21. Yeah, she was 21, 20. Yeah. And so that took me down a whole nother spiral. I was already the devil. I was already so mean, but that was a whole nother Stephanie that was just, it was terrifying and scary.
So I'm just going to, can you give an example? Because you've mentioned, you know, that you were the devil, and you've said, he's like, well, what are you talking about?
I was so mean to people. I took advantage of anyone I wanted to. My family, you know, they've always been, like, there and supportive, and I would just, you give me money, and then just mean to them.
So you weren't gracious. They'd give you money thinking that you were to say thank you, and you were just entitled to it.
Yeah. I was entitled to whatever I wanted. Yeah. I was like, I would leave my kids with my dad. It was his responsibility to care for them. All of these
You just
things,
expected him to do the parenting.
Yeah. And, but I didn't want to take them out in that world. I didn't want to involve them in any of that, you know, because here I am, 6 years in, I know what's going on out there. Like, and so I left them, and then I got a ticket in the beginning of 2011, and the judge had ordered me that I needed to do classes. In September of 2011, I decided that I was going to get clean and I was going to give these classes a chance. So I stayed home for 4 days, and I couldn't do it anymore. I just did not have that will to the want to do it. And I left.
You didn't have the will to do the drugs or to stay clean?
To stay clean.
Okay.
I wasn't ready. And so I left that weekend, and this is the weekend that changed my life. My sister had found me, and she tells me, we can't find Mom. She's missing. And she'd been drinking and throughout the year still. She'd gotten a DUI in April that year, and she went to treatment, but then she was, back out. But me and my mom had a really sick, toxic relationship. So, like, we kept each other sick. Like, I'd go to the liquor store for her, and then she'd give me money for my dope. Or, like, when I was really, really sick, she would pick me up and take care of me and feed me and, nurse me back to feeling better. And then I'd fight with her and I'd leave. And we just had a really sick relationship. And this weekend, my sister, she's like, we can't find Mom. And so there were some suicide notes that were left. But this was a routine thing that we'd gone through a lot, that she drinks, she drives. She said she was going to kill herself and end up calling the cops on herself and going to treatment. So it was a thing that we did a lot. This time was different, though. She left her purse and her computer and everything. And so the sheriffs pinged her phone up at Pineview, around there at Huntsville. And my cousin Natalie and Jeremy and his wife and them, they went looking for my mom that night, and no luck. So the next day they did a lot of flyers and posters and, put word out on Facebook, and everyone went looking for her, and still nothing. And I'd broken into her house at that point, sitting on her couch, like, knowing that she's going to pull in with that BMW. She's coming home. So I just sat there and stared out the window. And that night, the owner of Academy Mortgage, I just found this out today, is who funded the helicopter to go up around the dam. And it was like 7 o'clock at night. I'm like, this is really strange and weird, but it was God's timing that a light had hit off of her car, and they'd found her in the dam. She'd ultimately, her alcoholism led to her suicide, and she ultimately took her life. And driving, they weren't going to tell me, but I had someone on search and rescue that called and told me that there was a car found. And so I headed up there. I had to know, and when we got there, the sheriff, or the fire chief, he was like, well, we're going to put you up over here. And about 5 minutes later, they just said it's her. And that's when my whole world turned. And my mom was gone. The last thing that I ever thought would ever happen, and so that was September 6th of 2011, and I went right back to her house, and I became worse than I ever was, ever. I took over her house like I deserved it. Like I went in the house like it was mine. I went in the house and just really, she was a hard worker. She really tried to have nice things, and she worked her way, and I just really took advantage of who she was and just destroyed her home. And over the next year, the meth wasn't doing it for me anymore, and that's where the heroin comes into play. Something that I would never touch or use became my safe, my safe place to hide my feelings. It is what it was. But it took me down faster in that year than the previous using ever did. And on September 4th of 2012, I always said I wanted to be clean before her anniversary date. I got arrested, it was August 22nd, I got arrested in Davis County. And I called my family, like, get me out of here. You guys have to get me out. And they told me no. And that was the best thing that they could have ever done for me. They finally told me no. And I ended up in the drug court program. And at first, the first 4 months, I was doing it again for everyone else. That's how I'd always done my programs, because at the end of it, I could be back to whoever that girl was, And so I relapsed in January of 2013, and the judge, when I first went in, I used on a Monday. I went to court Tuesday. He gave me 4 hours for being honest. And I was like, oh, I got away with it. And then the next day I didn't use, but I U8 again, and my levels were higher. And I believe that was God. and I had to turn myself in.
So your levels actually had gone up even though you hadn't used?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And if I would have gotten away with that, I would have honestly probably continued that behavior that I'd always known, you know? But I had to go to jail. They put me in the work center so I could go to treatment from there, from Davis County. So I had to walk 1.5 miles, like back and forth to the bus stop. And this was in the dead of winter. It was snowing and it was icy. And I had 2 pants and 2 shirts for 3 months. And it was the most humbling experience I'd ever been through. Is those months. And at that point, I was like, you know, that's when I'm going to change. Like, I have to change. And so, you know, at this point, my kids' dad has them now. My dad had them for a few years, and then the kids' dad, you know, took them out to his families. And I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know anything, because from such a young age, I started this lifestyle, and anything productive or responsible I'd never done. And so I did that program, and I graduated at 20 months, and I started going to AA. Like, the first meeting I went to was in Ogden, and there were 2 people there. Like, okay. You know, I did a couple in jail because it was one of my mom's friends, and just needed that. And so I'd go to AA in jail, but I started going to recovery up in Ogden and up to Valley Camp and the women's retreat and all these meetings, and I found my home. You know, I finally found the people that loved me and that I felt comfortable with and that I belonged, and people that had been on the same path I'd been on and were willing to share it with me, but then carry me with them. And so I've been sober ever since. I've been clean on her anniversary date every year. It's my 10th year.
I just got chills.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
You know, at the end of the day, I truly believe that one of us had to go for the other to survive. So I believe that she's walking with me. You know, God took her to save me. You know, and me and my family talk about that often, that, you know, it is what it is.
Well, that's such an interesting perspective. You felt like your relationship with your mom was so codependent, so toxic and destructive that if you guys had lived together in life, you would have, neither one of you would have ever gotten sober. Better. So you felt like somebody had to go, and that maybe that there was a plan or a divine intervention there.
Yeah, there was a lot of God moments after her death that kind of were like, oh, okay, you know, like I know you're here. But I never thought I'd be this person. You know, I got my kids back when I was 2 years sober. I was stable with the job. Kind of felt, you know, a little bit of responsibility. And I've had them ever since. We participate in recovery events. Those are the people I surround myself with today. Just, you know, because we're doing the same things, but we have a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Like, we do a lot of fun things. I'm so much better sober. Like, I'm a loud, fun, outgoing person. I love to have a good time. Like, I host parties for everyone, you know, to come just, like, we watch the UFC fights and everyone just comes and hangs out, you know, potluck. Like, it's just those types of things. Like, it's so possible.
Real fun.
It's possible.
Real fun that lasts, that you remember, real relationships that are built. They're not all
genuine,
you know, shadowed by
authentic,
by drugs and alcohol.
How's your relationship with your father?
It's really good. So we lived together. I live with him, and I get to take care of him now. The roles have reversed. He was always there, you know, to pick me up.
He was, like you said, that stable force when you were younger, and now you get to be that for him.
I get to, yeah. You know, he doesn't have to worry about me. That's another thing. And my grandma, too, you know, I go over and take care of my grandma. They don't have to worry about Stephanie anymore. And they can depend on me. I'm reliable. My kids are, you know, they have a stable home. They have consistency. I have a 14-year-old, and sometimes, I'm just like, they're mouthy, at that age. And I'm like, but he's doing way better than I was. He's doing just fine,
I'm
That's
just
wonderful.
I'm so impressed with your openness. You're honest. Just because I know I've watched you throughout this whole podcast, and some of the stuff you've been saying has been tough for you to say. I can see it in your body language. I can hear it in your voice. But at one point during the podcast, you said, "I hope they don't see this, but they've got to know. I can't. Secrets make us sick, and if we hide stuff, we're not doing them any benefit." And I think you're going to help a lot of people with this podcast and your story. Dr. Matt, what are your thoughts?
No, I absolutely agree with that, and I admire your courage to come on and share your story. Even though you've been sober now for a decade, it's still challenging and takes courage to be able to share your story. My question for you is, so I often think in terms of people's development, and during your important developmental years, you were kind of running wild. You were kind of a feral kid. You weren't even required to go to school, and you mentioned that you didn't know who you were, and that's a result of that, unstructured childhood. You don't, when you can just run wild and get involved in drugs and alcohol at a young age, you don't really develop a healthy sense of self. But I get the sense that maybe you feel like you have a better sense of who you are now. Would you agree with that?
So let's
I do.
ask you,
Yeah.
who are you?
Today, I'm Stephanie. I'm a mother, a daughter, a wife. I'm a homeowner. I'm a friend. And I just genuinely love people. I want to see people succeed. I want to help them if I can. My sponsor and them, they are all in the big book and about sponsoring other people, and I'm trying to raise littles right now. So I'm just hoping just to share my story, even to help someone else. Or if people message me, I'll talk them through, that is my contribution, giving back. But talking about it, I just hope that it gives someone hope. It's possible. I was supposed to be that girl my entire life. That's who I thought I was going to be. And these last 9 years have been everything but that. It's been a growing, challenging, full of blessings. I always say your struggles give you your greatest strength. And I'm definitely my best self today.
And what I see is a strong, beautiful, confident mother.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing
Thank
your
you.
story. Thank you for stopping by and listening to Project Recovery today. Don't forget that it's brought to you by our friends at knowyourscript.org. And in case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
A KSL podcast.
You got it.